In this video, we will continue from the Crestron driver structure video and complete the initialization phase for our driver. At this point, our .cs files are created and our class structure is defined. We will be starting in the initialize method, contracted by the ITCP interface in our main transport class. The first step will be to create an instance of the transport we require and initialize its internal components. These statements are primarily for assigning components of a basic driver to our transport object. Next, we will initialize our transport, passing in our communications settings and assign it to the connection transport property of a basic driver. For a basic driver display protocol, we assign a new instance of our own protocol, again assigning the logging components for debugging. We then subscribe to the state change and RX out events. But instead of creating our own event handler methods, we assign an basic video display built-in method as our event handler. The final step here is to initialize the protocol feeding in display data. When we examine display data, we see that this is the root object used for deserializing the embedded JSON driver data file. Moving on to the protocol class. We create an instance of our own response validator class and assign it to the display protocol response validation property. The purpose of response validator class is to contain the code that ensures our responses match up to the expected responses from the JSON file. There is a virtual method within the response validation class that assists with this process. Within the response validator class, we override the validate response method and put code within to ensure the data is valid. The key here is to ensure the data is complete and is part of the correct command group based on the JSON file, and then return the data for additional processing by the driver framework. We start with a new validate RX data object with ready set to false and an empty string as the data. For our first test, we will set our object's command group to the command group determined by the framework and set our object's data to the entire incoming message. Before returning the data, make sure to set your object's ready property to true and then return the object. At this point, we are almost ready to load the driver to the control system, but we would like to gain some visibility on the communications first. We will add a print line statement to the validate response method. And in case the data returned was not as expected, we will interrupt the response before comparison to the JSON data by creating our own event handler for RX out in the transport class. We have now completed the initialization stage of our driver, and should have enough code in place to test functionality. In our next video, we will examine the protocol for our display device, load, and test the driver. Thanks for watching.